So just really grateful that you all have taken the time on this beautiful day to be with us. I know many of you are already part of the Ferry Legacy Society, so thank you for being a part of it. Some of you are here because you want to know more about what this is, so thank you also for being here and considering that. And just know that I am grateful for your presence here and being a part of the church and faithfully supporting the church in ways, and in particular for this one, in ways that go beyond the span of the days that God gives us. That's a hopeful thing to consider what happens beyond your life and how you might have an impact. So thank you for that. One of my goals in my 8 years of being here has been growing the Ferry Legacy Society, which is composed of folks who already have made this plan to include the church in their estate plans. And I've joked that I'll be long gone before we see the fruits of this come to harvest. But I have to say, I was wrong about that. We're already seeing this bear fruit in the church. And so today I want to celebrate just a few things about what legacy giving has already been doing for the church just in the last 12 to 18 months. This past year, so this was last year, our endowments generated over $175,000 that the session put to use. You are sitting in part of that. We refreshed the lounge. You can hear me today on this mic because of legacy money that bought this new sound system, okay? We added AC and heating to the Joyful Noise office. We supported my sabbatical. We enhanced the fall gospel reading program. We've paid for several years to have Dr. Matt Bruce as our regular teacher on Sundays and as an advisor to the Faith Formation Committee beyond Sunday mornings. We spent over $27,000 to update the fire panel and sensors. I'm sure you were excited about that work, weren't you? Yeah, it's super important, and we didn't have to turn around and ask you to help us do it. That's already legacy. We replaced the industrial dishwasher that keeps the kitchen humming, particularly for Joyful Noise. That's the one downstairs. We just, a couple of weeks ago, replaced 2 massive heating cooling units to the tune of $37,000. All of this your church did without having to ask the congregation for more or having to cut ministry so that we could have the building at the right temperature. And because we've been so blessed, it's not just about what we've done here for ourselves, for the ministry. We've gone beyond the church. We committed $20,000 to help with financial aid for Joyful Noise families over the past year. We supported the efforts of Presbyterian disaster assistance for the hurricanes. You remember that last fall with a significant matching campaign. And most recently, of course, we did Project Ripple Effect. That was $15,000 to go out into other things that we normally did not support. So this kind of legacy giving is enhancing and sustaining ministry already, and given the ebbs and flows of church ministry, the endowment is going to be something that helps us be strong even when times get uncertain. So know that your commitment to be a part of the Ferry Legacy Society will make a difference. Others' commitment, even though they didn't know they were in the society, is already making a difference. And so I'm just really, really grateful for this church and for what you all are doing. So before I step away from the mic, I do want to take a few moments to introduce a friend of mine and of this church, who likely in this room does not need much of an introduction, but the Reverend Dr. Riley Jensen has been an exceptional pastor for many decades, including significant tenures in Washington, New Jersey, and ultimately as the senior pastor of Westminster Presbyterian Church in Grand Rapids. In retirement, he attended this church regularly along with his now late wife, the Dr. Pam Kidd, whose biography and service to the church might just be longer than Riley's. Is that true? It's true. Riley has been a friend to me in ministry, inviting me into his home during my first couple of years here, preaching here from time to time, encouraging me that my golf game could get decent if only you all gave me more time to practice. So Riley knows the significance of legacy, and I join you in looking forward to hearing from him now. So let us extend a warm welcome to Riley Jensen. Grateful for you.
Well, I've got one of these mocktails,
That's still in here.
and I'm not convinced they're non-alcoholic. So if I start wobbling a little bit, Troy can come back up and finish. Well, I never got past Cub Scouts, and certainly never into Eagle Scout territory like some of you have. My lifelong motto has been, be prepared. Now, you won't believe it, but I was one of those guys who had their term papers in college finished a week or two ahead of time. Some might call that a character flaw, but it has come in handy as I've dealt with people who are not good planners. You've heard that phrase, poor planning on your part doesn't constitute an emergency on my part. However, I have to tell you that Sue never gave me the chance to decline this invitation for lack of preparation time when she extended the invitation for me to come to this gathering way back in last January. So I've had plenty of time to prepare. And actually, the truth is, I probably would have accepted an invitation to this event no matter what the timeline, because as Troy has said, Pam and I have had a special relationship with First Presbyterian Church and with Troy for many years, for which we're grateful. And because the topic of legacy is increasingly on one's mind when you reach a certain age, and many of us have reached a certain age. I taught a legacy class at the Parkwood Presbyterian Church a few years ago, and there I shared somewhat facetiously that I was proud that all of my children identified with the same political party. Now, I won't say which one, but you will get a clue when I tell you that when my son was a youngster, we were watching the NewsHour, to which I was adding my own ongoing commentary, and Randy turned to me and he said, "Dad, we're liberals, aren't we?" I can tell that story in front of you because I'm retired. But the truth is, I think that most of them identify these days as independents, but it goes to the point that what we most want to pass on to our children are our values. Now, as many of you know, and as Troy has already mentioned, I lost my dear wife Pam last year, and while I could go on and on about the wonderful legacy that she has left, the beauty is that she was able to summarize it in one word. During one of her visits, the pastor of Westminster asked her if there was a word that she felt summarized her life. What a great question. And her answer, because she was a physician, probably is not surprising, but it was, to me, revelatory. The word she shared was healer. I'm a healer. Her deepest sense of identity was as a healer. And I would submit that that's a legacy that she has passed on to many people. But think about it. What's your word? Do you have a word? And is it also your legacy? Now, I assume that you are here because some part of the concept of legacy has captured your imagination. Now, many of you are already members of the Ferry Legacy Society, and others of you may be exploring whether your concept of legacy might include such a membership. And first, I want to congratulate you as First Presbyterian Church for having such a program. It might surprise you to know, and maybe not, that church endowment or legacy programs can be controversial. Some feel that having large financial reserves will put a damper on regular giving. That is, if we have so much in the bank, well, the church really doesn't need my money. In one of my churches, our philosophy was to be lean and mean. That is, to keep a minimal amount for a financial buffer while getting the rest out the door as quickly as possible so that it can begin doing the work of the mission of the church. And frankly, I subscribed to that theory for a number of years until I realized that becoming too lean can become a slippery slope into survival mode. Now, the fact is that the landscape of the church has changed. It's changed since its glory days in the 50s. Those were the days when evangelism meant opening the doors of the church on Sunday morning. Those were the days when the family that prays together stays together. And those were the days when the institution of the church was integral to the fabric of society. And while the decline of church attendance and affiliation has been steady since the late 60s, the COVID pandemic, as we know, has accelerated that trend. And I got a firsthand look at that when I served as the interim preaching pastor at Park Congregational Church for 2 years. First having my sermons videotaped as I preached to an empty sanctuary, and then continuing as folks gradually came back for in-person worship. While some churches, like your church, like First Presbyterian, have done better than others, few, if any, have recovered their former glory. Now, I'm waiting for someone to adopt the slogan, "Make the church great again." Actually, that's what the Christian nationalists are trying to do, with the twist of doing away with the separation of church and state as well as freedom of religion. But whether you agree with that diagnosis or not, we can agree that the landscape of the church has dramatically changed. And of course, it can't be about making the church great again, as if we would ever be able to do so, much less even want to go back. Yes, going back might be nice if it meant that our churches were fuller, if it meant that evangelism just meant opening the doors on Sunday mornings, but that would also mean going back to some other things. It would mean going back to a time when we deprived women of leadership in the church, to a time when gays were not only not welcome, but even feared, to a time when listing a church affiliation on your resume might actually be helpful in getting a job. Now, those glorious days of yesteryear were also a time when the church was in bed with the culture, which has been the case since the Edict of Milan in 313, when Emperor Constantine stopped the persecution of the church and awarded the church favored status with the state. Now, prior to that time, we, the church, were just small, struggling, persecuted minority, and we weren't popular because our message was countercultural. Christ was king. Caesar was not God, and there were no tax breaks for preaching Christian morality, since the church regularly challenged the powers that be. So, no, I don't think that making the church great again is consistent with the Christian message. A better motto as we move into the future, I think, is let the church be the church. Let us be that place that models compassion and stands on the side of justice. Let us be that place that lifts up the life and the teachings of Jesus. Let us be that place where community is found, where support is given, and where we seek to model lives of love. Now, that's the kind of church that most of us have experienced, and the kind of church that we want to be available for generations to come. This kind of church is a servant church. It's not an imperial church. It's not the kind of church where you have to learn the secret handshake, but rather one where all are welcome, not just those who believe as we do. Now, a quick illustration before I make a more concerted effort to get into your checkbooks. On a recent Youth Sunday in one of your neighboring churches, the speaker was a young woman who gave one of the most surprising introductions I've ever heard, certainly on a Youth Sunday. She opened by saying, "The first thing you need to know about me is that I am an agnostic. Before I came to this church, I thought that being an agnostic and a member of the church were mutually exclusive. But here, she said, I have received a welcome and acceptance for who I am, and that has changed my life. Friends, that's the kind of church that many of us have experienced. Certainly the kind of church that we want to deliver to the next generation. So what does this have to do with the Ferry Legacy Society? As most of you already know, and as I'm learning to appreciate, the Ferry Legacy Society was created with the recognition that there are some things that we can do now that will help ensure that the church that we know and love will continue to have a meaningful ministry long into the future. Now, it is clearly an idea that has caught on and gained momentum at First Presbyterian Church, because in less than 10 years, you have already registered, I'm told, 42 families in probably a few more in terms of number in the Ferry Legacy Society. And people have joined and registered for the Ferry Legacy Society for the reason that we hope this will ensure, as Troy just said, some things about the future of First Presbyterian Church. And I admire the flexibility that you have built in, allowing for both restricted and unrestricted gifts. Now, let me share with you a few examples. Troy has said given you some examples that are very appropriate to this church. Let me share with you a few examples of how such a fund has made a difference in other churches. Now, yours is technically not an endowment fund, but because it provides for the use of those funds into the future, membership in the Ferry Legacy Society can serve many of the same purposes, one of which is to keep the church going during hard times. Now, while all churches have their ups and downs, COVID brought us all to our knees when services were canceled, and even when they weren't, folks exited in-person worship in droves. And when I served Park Church for those 2 years, I came to realize how important their legacy fund was, as it helped them to navigate that period when attendance was down or non-existent and when the budget took a nosedive. Now, while some churches might have had to cut staff and dramatically cut back on program, because of their significant legacy fund, they were able to fund their budget through their difficult period until better, more normal times arrived. And that experience has been duplicated. It's been duplicated in numerous churches that have had the foresight to create some sort of legacy funding. Now, sometimes the use of a legacy fund is not as dramatic, but nevertheless strategic. One of the churches I served had gone through a destabilizing period, if you can imagine this, having fired both of their pastors. My job, being called as the new pastor, was, of course, to pick up the pieces and to restore them to their former glory, which of course I did. But not without help from their legacy fund. And when I arrived, they were dealing with an emergency maintenance project. Their church building was a beautiful stone structure, but as I discovered, such structures need to regularly undergo a process called tuck pointing in order to secure the building against leaks between the stones. And the cost of such an effort would have required a major fundraising project. And my judgment was that such a project would have required a diversion of time and energy better devoted to a renewal of the program life of the church. And when I made my case, an emergency was declared, and they had to do that in order for us to access special legacy funds. And I was always grateful for the presence of that fund, because it made all the difference in helping to start my ministry there in the most productive way. Now, with the creation of something like a legacy society, there also comes a certain amount of uncertainty. Now, while some members of the Ferry Legacy Society have shared an intended number that they want to share in the future, others have indicated maybe a percentage, and others are waiting for a future time to become more more concrete. But frankly, as the membership in the society grows, and it will, those numbers are going to take care of themselves. But the truth is, and I want to emphasize this, the truth is you don't know what's out there. But I guarantee you there will be some surprises. Now, I suppose every minister dreams of receiving a gift so large that it will absolutely ensure the financial future of the church. Now, in one of my previous churches, we had a legacy program that had been in place for a number of years, and almost every year there were some nice additions to that fund. So it wasn't unusual to hear a rumor that one of our recently deceased members had left a significant amount to the church. And I was soon notified that indeed we were about to receive a significant, but not fantastic amount in the neighborhood of $10,000. However, much to my surprise, the rumors persisted that there was even more to come. And I assumed that people didn't understand that we had already received our portion of the estate. But I was soon to discover that with many large estates, there is more than one distribution. And when we received our final distribution, it was in the amount of $3 million. And it turned out to be a restricted gift for mission, for local mission, and the homeless in New Jersey. And that left us with another problem: how to interpret those words, since suddenly everyone was interpreting their work as local mission. Well, we ultimately worked it out, but I discovered that the church can argue as much over good fortune as bad fortune. The point being that as you continue to tell the story of the Legacy Society, you are providing a vehicle for those who love the church to match their money with their values. Okay, I've tried to make a case for why being part of the Ferry Legacy Society is a good thing. I've appealed to your commitment to the church, your love for the church, that the ministry of love and justice that the church stands for needs to continue, and that a gift to the Ferry Legacy Society represents the kind of legacy that you want to be a part of. And probably any one of those reasons would be sufficient to ensure your participation. But there's one more. There's one more, and it's grounded biblically, and it speaks to our essential identity as Christians. Now, it should come as no surprise to you that this preacher is not going to let you get out of here without doing some Bible study. Now, those of you who were privileged to be here a few years ago when John Buchanan spoke, you will remember that he grounded his remarks in that verse of Scripture, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And as usual, John was profound and insightful. And some of you will remember that for context, John reminded us that Jesus spoke more about money than he did about any other subject, which means that how we handle our money is essential to our Christian lifestyle. Because there's so much to choose from, I could have directed us to a myriad of Bible verses, but I'd like to direct you to one of my favorites in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, where Paul writes, "We want you to know, brothers and sisters, about the grace of God that has been granted to the churches in Macedonia. For during a severe ordeal of affliction, their abundant joy and extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part. For, as I can testify, they voluntarily gave according to their means, and even beyond their means." And then a few verses later, we have this well-known verse, "For you know the generous act of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes became poor, that by your poverty you might become rich." Now, what we have here is not only a description of a Christian lifestyle as generous, but it's also a call to have the kind of mindset that makes such generosity possible. It is very simply the example of Jesus that enables us to adopt such a mindset. He was rich. That is, he was in a place of privilege at the right hand of God. And he gave that up so that we might know the riches of the abundant life. And being rich in this way means that we are able to realize that when we live our lives with an attitude of abundance, when we realize that by God's grace, our needs will be met, then we can be a generous people and not a hoarding people, a people who live out of abundance rather than scarcity. There's an exchange in Dan Brown's thriller, The Lost Symbol, which I read and you may have read several years ago. And some of you may remember that the hero, Robert Langdon, played by Tom Hanks in the movie, is a worldly and cynical professor who is an expert on symbolism and world religions. And as such, faith was not a natural part of his vocabulary. And toward the end of the book, there is an exchange with his friend and scientist Catherine Solomon, in which she challenges him to take faith more seriously. When she says, then don't think of it as faith. Think of it as simply changing your perspective, accepting that the world is not precisely as you imagine it. Well, that little exchange hooked me, because I think that's where many of us are. It seems to me that adopting any new behavior takes a certain amount of faith. As the Bible asks us to adopt a lifestyle of generosity, it also asks us to change our perspective, to one of abundance rather than scarcity. And part of that change of perspective is to realize that giving is never just a one-way street. Giving and receiving are two sides of the same coin. There's an old rabbinic saying, more than the householder does for the poor does for the householder. Now, I know I'm taking Collins to Newcastle here because you wouldn't be here if you hadn't already experienced something of the joy of giving. And I pray that that joy will continue, not only for each of you individually, but also as it pervades a church that can move more confidently into the future because of your generosity. May it be so. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Reverend.
Oh, where's my mocktail? Can't forget the important things.